part one of a two-part series that I'm going to be talking about the Beatitudes. And I'm going to be using the Sermon on the Mount Bible study from the Daily Grace Company. Looks like this. It has been an amazing study. The Beatitudes are in Matthew at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. So I have just started this devotional about a week and a half ago. And so the whole beginning of it is on the Beatitudes because it is part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. So a lot of what I want to talk about and what I've learned has come from studying that book and the questions. They ask good questions, and it just helps me to apply it using that devotional. So that's been a great resource. I'll try and link it below. The Sermon on the Mount is one of the few times that Jesus taught a long time to a large group of people. The Sermon on the Mount, I don't know if it's the longest sermon of Jesus's we have, but it is definitely one of the longest, if not the longest. And it starts out with what we call the Beatitudes. And these are 8 commands or instructions God gives us. And then basically, if you do these things, he gives us a promise with them of how he will bless us. Some of them are, for all believers. Others are things we need to work on in our own lives. And I think it's especially neat, the Daily Grace Code devotional has pointed out how they go together and the progression that they go in. We have to have the first one before we can have the other ones. That kind of thing has been super neat. So let's look at it. It's in Matthew chapter 5 is where it starts. And I'm going to start in verse 1. And seeing the multitudes, he went up into a mountain, and when he was set, his disciples came unto him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So in Matthew 5, verse 3, we see the first beatitude. And that is, those who are poor in spirit will gain the kingdom of heaven. And I never really understood what this meant. I think I thought it was more of a, if you're sad, then, God's going to comfort you type of thing. But that is really not what it is at all. This is more about being poor in spirit, as in being broken, and recognizing, we are broken, we are poor, we are not, we don't have it all together, and understanding a need for a Savior and coming before him broken. And so this applies to all believers. All people have to come to a point of brokenness before they can accept salvation. And as believers, we need to continue to be poor in this way, to be broken before God, to recognize our weaknesses and our need for him, and to continue to look to him for satisfaction. The promise is that we will gain the kingdom of heaven. And obviously, we will have eternity in heaven with God. But it's also, part of that kingdom we can see here on earth as we follow him and become more like Christ. So that is the first beatitude. The second is in verse 4. It says, Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. And this mourning is not the typical, being sad over a death or something tragic that happens. This mourning is over sin. And God says those that mourn, they will be comforted. So this applies to every Christian as well, because we need to recognize our sin for what it is, our sin that is part of our lives, part of the curse. We need to realize the effects of the curse and really be upset over it, be angry at sin and at what has happened because of the fall. And when we do that, the promise is that they will be comforted, and that comfort comes from God. When we recognize our sin, and this goes along with our brokenness, when we are broken and we recognize our sin and we mourn over that sin and we ask forgiveness and we are just sorrowing because of all we've done to reject Christ and to drift far away from him, then God promises he will be there to comfort us. That is just such a beautiful picture. Number 3 is in verse 5. It says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Now this one can be a little more self-explanatory when you understand what meek means. And meek is not being weak. That was one thing that the book clarified, the devotional. It says that the meek are being self-controlled. They're being submissive to God. They're understanding that God is sovereign. God is in control and not worrying. Just being surrendered and submissive to God's plan. And that's something that we need to work on as Christians. Being meek is something that Jesus exemplified, and it's something that I know I need to work on, and I think a lot of us could do better at it. And God promises that those who are meek will inherit the earth. And this is, again, part of enjoying God's kingdom while we are here on earth. Those who are meek, we can have more joy because we are surrendered. We can become more like Christ. And inheriting the earth also refers to having an inheritance because we are an heir of the King. So we become co-heirs with Christ. We become part of his family. And the last one I will be talking about in this part 1 of the Beatitudes is in chapter 5, verse 6. It says, "Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled." And I think this one is right in the middle, and I think it might be one of my favorite Beatitudes. It says, "Blessed are those who thirst and hunger after righteousness." And it's just having a longing, a desire to become more like Christ, a desire to be sanctified, to be conformed into Christ's image. Righteousness has two sides to it. It has the side of justification, which happens at salvation, getting Christ's righteousness in place of our sin. And the second part is sanctification, which we are constantly growing in and becoming more like Christ. And we are supposed to thirst after both. We have justification, and then we are supposed to have a longing to become more like Christ. And when we do, God honors that. It says, "For they shall be filled." God is going to satisfy that longing. When we truly desire to become more like Christ and to glorify him and be a better representative of him, he is going to satisfy that longing. He is going to work in us to make us more like his son. So those are the first 4 of the 8 Beatitudes in Matthew 5. I encourage you to continue studying them on your own. And in a couple weeks, I will do another video, part 2, that is going to be on the next 4 Beatitudes. So stay tuned for that. If you are not subscribed, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification button so you know when this study comes out. And let us know if you have any videos ideas. We'd love to hear them. We always like your input. But I hope this video encouraged you and starts you on a study that you can continue.